Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. We got a really interesting session to talk about, but first I want to introduce everybody on this panel. So first I have Lynne Mecca, so she works in global mobility at PVH. I have Sandy, she works at global mobility at Mace. Anna works in global mobility in HR at Alfa Laval. Pete is at Rolls-Royce, and Khadija is at Greco. So part of the interesting way that this conversation goes is that these are very different companies with very different global mobility programs. So I want to walk you through some of the differences and why it's a little bit more dynamic than you might expect. And I guess to start off, my first question would be for Sandy, because Sandy, obviously, the global mobility program at Mace is a little bit new compared to some of the other global mobility programs out there. So can you walk us through some of the things you've been doing and what you're focused on at the moment?
So with Mace has been going for a number of years. But global mobility has been, I guess, various parts of the business have been doing their own thing. So more recently, we've been trying to pull that all together within a global mobility policy across the business. And we did a little bit of benchmarking, looking at what other organisations were doing, looking at our peers, the industry. But ultimately, we decided it was more about best fit for us as opposed to best practice.
Yeah.
So obviously when I say that, I mean you have to be compliant with immigration, tax regulations. So I'm not talking about compliance, more about thinking about what our business objectives are and aligning our policies to those objectives. So making sure that when we say best in class, it's about making sure that we've got the right resources support to support that policy. And obviously, organisations change over the years and our strategy approaches can change as well. And some organisations, for example, the priority might be sustainability. And I work in construction, engineering, and sustainability is up there in terms of our business objectives. So our policy has some alignment to that. And making sure, for example, with accommodation, making sure that our assignees are in accommodation that has energy suppliers that are eco-friendly, making sure that furniture, appliances are rented rather than bought, so they can be returned, reused, and that a lot of our business in our culture is about that, making sure that we are making it. So we're saying best in class, and that aligns to best in the world, but it's not really best in the world, it's best for,
Right.
which brings in that sustainability piece. So it's making sure that when you are, and as you say, we are quite new at it, we're just developing our policy, but making sure that you have the business objectives in mind when you're doing it.
I like that you say the benchmarking example. Everyone on that stage, have you ever done a benchmarking exercise for your program? Yes? No?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes, everyone. How many of you have actually taken the feedback and perfectly aligned to the benchmark? Yeah, so I think that resonates really well, because obviously when you're benchmarking, you're looking at what other people are doing with their mobility programs, but that's not going to tell the same story, because we all have a different assignee population. We work in a different industry. We have different needs for deploying global mobility. And I think one of the things that's interesting, if you're developing a program today or you're creating policies, at least for the first time, maybe the program existed, but it didn't have a structure. When you're making that structure and you're going through the exercise today, Sandy, your assignee population today is going to look different from the assignee population that existed when global mobility became the thing in sort of the 80s, officially had a name. And so the policies that were written and that have just been minorly adapted over time are going to look very different from policies that are being written today.
Absolutely. I mean, assignees are very different from sort of in the 80s to where they are today. The assignee profile, I mean, within my industry and sector, it's probably might be a bit different per sector, but within construction engineering, you had career expats back in the 80s. You went from project to project. Engineering and construction is very project-led, client-led. So you might go out on assignment to Middle East, and then go to Europe, US, and the assignee themselves were very different. Mainly, you might have a single male, white male, going on assignment, their family was left back home, whatever the home location was, and then just go from assignment to assignment, make lots of money, pay off the mortgage, retire early. That was now very different, more diverse assignee population, not just men, women obviously going out with partners, families, and we're geared towards more the assignee experience opposed to the assignee package.
Yeah.
I think quite a number of years ago, 30 years ago, it was about the package, how much money you could make, doing your technically skilled to do. Now it's more about, and obviously we're in a cost of living crisis, we're very conscious about financials. So it's more about the experience, gaining experience from an assignment, then bringing it back to the home country, making sure you can share the benefits of that experience. Or alternatively, you still will become a permanent transfer into that country. So I know cost is obviously on the agenda for a lot of organisations, and making sure your policies are cost efficient, and that the assignee population will bring to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was actually a perfect segue to introduce it, Anna a little bit more, because I know at Alfa you're focusing on leveraging the local mobility in a way that sort of enables the talent strategy. Can you walk us through what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We have very long-serving employees, and they've been with us for a very long time. And I'm responsible for the UK&I. And trying to bring the best talent into here has been kind of one of my drivers for the last couple of years. And actually, what we've been really focusing on is the employee experience and making it individual for those employees. So we have a framework, we have the law, we work within those parameters, and trying to do the right thing to get the best talent in has meant we've had to be creative with our thinking and do things slightly differently and more personal and individual than we have done in the past. I think from a business perspective, we've definitely had to look at our landscape, and going into the pandemic, we're very mindful of costs. Coming out of the pandemic, we then were in a very different place where we were looking at our turnover and our retirees, and how do we bring in an engineering world, some very, very skilled individuals to roles that are really hard to find, and making sure that we retain that best talent is about giving them opportunities that we need to be creative in how we find ways to get them moving globally. And for me, how I bring them into the UK is how I've been trying to work on an individual basis rather than taking something and holding that firm.
Yeah, we were talking about the employee experience, and so obviously at Alfa you're focusing on putting the employee experience first. And so sometimes that means you take something like the core flex policy, but you're focusing more on the flex than on the core. So on the benefits that are available to everybody, but then looking at on that individual basis for every assignee and their family, how are you going to make that work? How are you going to make it attractive for each person? But then there are other times in history when the focus has been less on the employee experience and more on the cost savings. So where are you right now in your program?
In the middle.
Okay.
I think it absolutely, for me, I want to retain people. So I don't want to bring somebody over here and they leave without having that experience that we want them to have. So how do I do that? From the very beginning, how do we help individuals really see where they're moving to, what their life will be like there? How are we giving them everything at their fingertips to make the informed decision for them that this is the right role, this is the right opportunity for me to move to? But balancing costs. And very much for me, I want to make sure that hiring managers are hiring the right person for the role, and if that means that's more costly in the long run, that will pay off.
It's more costly for a failed assignment.
Absolutely. So it's balancing. It's a constant balancing act, but it's doing it for me on that individual basis.
Yeah, I think pretty much every year there's statistics that come out in different reports that talk about how the main stakeholders that mobility have to work with are HR, and you would know that very well, and talent, and you would know that very well, and also just partnering with the business and of course the assignee. And I think what you're talking about really feeds into Khadijah's story nicely, because you're working with the same stakeholders, but there's different stakeholders who are taking up the majority of the time right now because that's who aligns with your main business objectives. So maybe Khadijah, can you tell us what you're working on at Greco?
Yes, so Agrapco is very project-driven and client-focused organisation. So majority of our moves are actually driven by wherever we've got projects going on in the world. It's not traditional kind of long-term assignments that other organisations have. So we're really focused on, and this has happened as a consequence of COVID, which was actually an opportunity for us rather than, obviously things happened which weren't so great, but actually from a mobility perspective, we got our seat at the table. And we're very much focused on kind of keeping and retaining that seat there and showing the business that we're more than just a team who obtains like immigration documents or processes, tax returns, although we don't do any of that ourselves internally. Our organisation and our stakeholders assumed pre-pandemic that that's all that we were doing. Now what they are seeing and what they're actually using us for is that more kind of strategic decision making. So we get involved in like project planning, bidding, proposals, and making sure that we're actually moving people more efficiently and we're moving the right talent at the right time so that we don't necessarily get fines and penalties, etc., whether from governments or from the clients. But it's a really different kind of change that we've made. So pre-COVID, we were very much focused on these are our policies and you've got to follow our policies, and we were kind of policing them, so to speak. And then we realised when we actually understood the business and what they want from us that actually they're not necessarily looking for us to put like a square peg into a round hole. They actually want us to bring something different. They want us to add value. And the way that we feel that we can add value is because we are not just, only covering one piece of the puzzle. We can, engage in conversations about expat tax, some corporate tax, employment law, whether it's in, international labour law, immigration. We kind of bring the whole piece, whereas other teams within our organisation, they're very much siloed. So we have that kind of international remit that we bring. And I think for us, that's why it was very important, that session that we had earlier, that we could actually rely on our partners more, because we're seen as, that kind of team within the company that actually can really make the process efficient and save money at the same time for the organisation. But we cannot do it ourselves. We're kind of, in that picture that's, ever so popular now, is where the iceberg is, there's a little piece sticking out of the iceberg and everything else is going on under the surface. And that's exactly what we are. So we really depend on our wider network to make sure that we do it properly and holistically. And the business actually want that from us. So we now get involved in all of the conversations where we're invited to all the kick-off meetings, etc. But the challenge that we have is that we need to keep at that table as well, because there's a lot going on in our organisation generally, because we are truly global and we're constantly winning projects across the globe. But we're not necessarily able to deliver to the business expectation without the support of our providers. So it's kind of managing expectations, but actually building our own kind of ecosystem outside of a Greco for us, for instance, because it's the only way that we can make it work.
I like that. I think when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, you were telling me this, not a horror story, but an example of sometimes when it goes wrong, when mobility is not brought into the table, that's when they should be. That sometimes there's certain things that need to be done in order to make an assignment successful, and those things don't get looked after because people within the business might think, oh, you only handled immigration and we didn't need it, so we didn't involve you, but we've sent this person on this assignment.
And it's gone wrong.
Or it could create massive tax costs.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or I think we've all seen examples of this happening, and it's like the person didn't get cultural training because the business was trying to go a bit leaner on the costs, but actually there was a really large cultural problem, and now you have a person who doesn't want to be there, so you have a failed assignment. And someone was asking a question earlier about P&L, and there's a huge cost when there's a failed assignment, so you have to consider that as well when you're looking at your strategy. that it's all of the aspects of mobility. It is not just the immediate compliance concerns, though those take the forefront. Yeah. And then I think a lot of what you said, and then also a lot of what Anna said, is referred to some of the work that Pete's been doing at Rolls-Royce. So I think it would be really great to hear your perspective about the assigning population you have when they're going on assignment. How are you leveraging that, and where do they go?
Absolutely. So Rolls-Royce make aero engines for civil aircraft, helicopters, ships. So we have a lot of engineers. We sell a product to a customer. We send a service mechanic out as part of the aftercare service for those products. So that's where our mobility program was born, in sending engineers out, sending very technical people out to quite remote locations. However, we've moved on from that now into the talent development area. So we're obviously, like everybody else on this panel, trying to attract the right talent, and that could start with early career. It can start with your graduate intake. So what you have to do, what we've chosen to do, is try and play back measures of success. So you mentioned how your team may have struggled to show that they've added value. What we've tried to do is really, when we have had success, when we've had great retention statistics from international assignees who have stayed in the business after their assignments, we've been able to play that back to them as a look at this retention statistic. It's improved from 30% to 60% over 2 years. It's things like that we have tried to demonstrate. Other things like looking at your program from a cost angle. When you are going through that selection process for an international assignee, is there a possibility that there is local talent available in the location where you're proposing to send that person? If there is local talent, then there's another measure of success. You've saved the company tens of thousands of pounds from sending an expat into a location. You're developing local talent and you're improving retention. It's things like this where you're able to go back to leadership, show that you're a real strategic partner to the business by adding value, by showing these measures of success.
And I think they differentiate, don't they? So they're going to be different for every company that's going through this. And I think some of the measures are, was it on budget? And we talked about some of the measures are, was it on time? And some of the measures are, how happy were your employees? What was the result of your survey at the end of an assignment? Some of the measures are, how low was the cost? So not necessarily was it within the original budget, but did you manage to find cost savings initiatives throughout? And everybody's going to be at a different point in their journey when they're looking at it, and it's going to appeal to people differently. And I'm looking at Lynne because I know that you're special as well, but obviously you're doing something different at the moment at PVH. So you've come on board. How long have you been at PVH?
I started PVH in September. So Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, for those who don't know. Yeah, I started there. I was at Unilever for 10 years and moved over to PVH. And I moved because I wanted to learn and grow. And boy, as I learned, grew a lot. Learning a new company in the industry. And also their program is completely different. Although we're doing ideally the same thing, our program was completely different. And one of the biggest struggles when I first arrived there is that they had 4 permanent transfer policies just within EMEA, so it depended on where you were moving to. The internal candidates would get an extremely generous policy where we were shipping cars and selling houses and helping people buy houses, a very generous policy, which was extremely expensive. And then there was also another policy for external new hires, and that was really cheap. So all these internal candidates were getting passed by because the hiring managers were saying, well, this person's cheaper because the policy that they're getting is much cheaper. So all these new people were coming into the organization where all the internal associates, as I call them, employees, associates, were getting passed by. And so there was no equity. So we had to revamp the policy to make sure that it was equitable for everybody, the new people coming in and also the people there. The other thing that was really made a big difference was that the budgeting, the cost, who's paying for this? So the externals were getting paid from the central budget, this endless pot of gold that was, the hiring managers didn't have to pay for their movers, where if the hiring manager took an internal candidate, they had to pay. So no manager ever wanted to promote or move from within. So we really were able to open up the EVP for our associates by changing the policy. And also, of course, always, don't forget our planet. So we're not going to be moving cars anymore. We're going to, change some tweaks in the policy to make sure that, household goods aren't going to cost so much. We're going to give cash, open up a lot more flexibility and a lot more equity for all the people who move, and that everybody, the mobility it's a difficult job because we're expected to do a lot. We're expected to sit at the table. We're expected to be the strategic advisors and be able to manage return on investment and be able to manage compliance, 100% compliance, no risk whatsoever. And there's a lot that we have to be able to manage within, but also offer flexibility and make sure nobody's upset and it, it's not expensive. And yeah, so it was by tweaking the policy, actually we revamped it quite drastically. By changing the policy now, it's going to be much more fair and it's going to be way more affordable that internal candidates, internal people are going to have opportunity to move around within the organization. They can move from footwear, Calvin Klein or go move from, underwear to, to footwear to, different parts of the organization. So
I like that because it's not, we talk a lot about bringing in business-wide initiatives into global mobility. So there's a lot of initiatives about ESG and there's a lot of initiatives about DE&I. But one of the things that we as a group have discussed is that you have to have strong roots in your program first before you can achieve the sort of nirvana status. And what you're talking about is essentially enabling DE&I because you're creating equity. You're starting with the equity.
Yeah.
You're making sure the program is equitable, and that will bring in all of the questions that we have about winning the war, not the war on talent, but winning the talent shortage and bringing talent in, because you're saying at PVH you've got a lot of creative hires. You need to attract those creative people. So there's the conversation about bringing the talent in. Then there's the conversation about developing the talent and having them stick around and maybe making their tenure as long as they are at Alfa, because how long are your assignees at Rolls-Royce usually?
We usually do 3-year assignments as a maximum, but the frightening statistic when it comes to retention is that we found that we were losing 60% of our assignees at the end of their assignment. So we had to do something about retention. We had to put things in place where people had real objectives from their assignments and things that they could tangibly take into their next role. And actually a projection forward, an idea of where their next role was going to be in the organisation. So things like that have really helped us try and embed a better retention in the programme. And again, that plays back to the leadership, because we can't afford to be losing talent to our competitors in the scenario that we're all in today, where there just isn't enough talent out there.
Yeah, I'm thinking, we haven't had that conversation, but I was thinking about how when you look at an assignment policy, there's often a lot of thought into the pre-assignment procedure and the on-assignment procedure, and then the repatriation is almost just like, and whatever you had at the beginning, you get back. But then there's no conversation about your career trajectory and what role will you take. And I've worked with companies before who've sent someone on assignment, they've been promoted on assignment, they've had this really important job in the host location, and then they've come back and almost received a demotion. And it's like everything that you've learned and grown from, you are not now applying. And then as soon as they come back, they say, well, I'll take my skills elsewhere. So it is something to be really conscious of, that the skills you're developing, you want to keep those skills in-house. It costs a lot of money to bring those skills.
It's mapping talent management with global mobility.
Yeah.
And if you understand your talent, you understand where they have their career aspirations, they should be working in partnership with each other. We should be trying to then match where they're coming to next, because we understand where we see their skills, but we also understand where they want to go in their career. And by kind of doing some of that forward planning, forward thinking, I only see that working together, because talent management is key to this. Otherwise you do end up with what you've just described. You end your assignment, you go back to what? And that experience, again, it goes back to that experience.
And those conversations aren't starting early enough, are they? Starting, a week before somebody's due to return back to their country. Really, those conversations should be ongoing, at least, at minimum maybe 3 months before the assignment end date. The assignment end date is not usually a surprise, it's coming up. Sometimes you get extended, but ultimately you will know when it could be visa related, that you know when your assignment's going. And managers having the host country and home country manager as well having that conversation to talk about what next career step is going to be for them.
And that's why the role of the global mobility professional today has changed so much. As Khadija just pointed out, pre-COVID, global mobility was just the team who got people visas. But now, you know, they're able to show, they've been able to show their expertise in your organisation. Anna's talked about aligning mobility or using mobility as a tool for talent management. And it's these things which are changing everybody's scope, as well as managing business visitors, talking to potential candidates about about what it's like to live abroad and making sure that the move is successful. The scope of the role is just vast now, and I think because the scope of the role is changing, the mobility professional is rising up in terms of importance in an organisation.
I think one thing that we as mobility team have the benefit of, which other areas within our business certainly don't, is that we have visibility of what is happening in global projects. So our business works very much on a regional basis or a kind of country by country basis. And when we have conversations with our business stakeholders, we can let them know that this other project is going to be ending in another region. So if you need that talent, those skills, tap into that talent pool and then bring them over, and you can align it together with the operations manager so that one project finishes and the other one, they can be redeployed to the other. And it's something that's it's working really well. And I don't think that necessarily needs to sit with us. I think there needs to be kind of more communication between ops managers globally and HR business partners globally as well. But at the moment, that's something that we're having to kind of coordinate because we can see it. We can see that we run the risk of losing key talent because they think that maybe, I don't know, a project's coming to an end in Kenya, that we might have to let those employees go, but they have a lot of skills and niche knowledge that only they have. And to hire and upskill somebody could take years on our own equipment. So we're then, making it work. So we have more value add for the business because we can see that holistic piece. I know my buzzword for today is clearly holistic. But it is something that we can really, add value to. And I don't know if there is a system out there, but that would be something that maybe Zane could look at. But to better allow companies to better manage kind of the workforce as well, because we know we're having to rely on conversations, but if there was a system out there that could do it for us, that we need these skills and, in these countries may have these nationalities that can get people deployed in country earlier, that would work wonders for a company like ourselves who heavily depend on project workers going, and if we don't send people on time, we get fined. So, maybe that's something you can look at the next stage of evolution and saying, but it's something that's definitely needed.
I think there is a tool, I think there is a talent mobility tool out there that can be used. But the struggle is, of course, is getting your entire workforce to input all of their skills and knowledge and what they can and cannot do, where they have and have not been, and have HR look at it and make sure
have immigration, tax, etc. all added to it.
Yes,
that's I think what's missing, because there are just independent silo tools out there, but it's not cumbersome. It doesn't have everything. So we can work together to patent that idea afterwards. But it's something that's really missing, and most organisations who are very client-driven, project-focused, like our organisation in Rolls-Royce, for instance, would really benefit from that.
Yeah. And then what do you think is expected of global mobility today and the overall business? What do you think they expect of us?
They expect us to open up opportunities and expand the EVPs and make sure we're 100% tax compliant, corporate tax compliant, social security compliant with A1 certificates and immigration compliant. to provide an amazing employee experience, to manage return on investment, to know where the talent is globally and where the talent is and what skills they have to be able to move into the next role, and to manage, many parts. Our stakeholders are HR, pensions, payroll, tax, and, we go very broad in all of our stakeholders that we have to manage in our role. And we can't survive without our ecosystem.
Yeah.
Our ecosystem, we have to be completely aligned with our ecosystem. We're only as strong as our ecosystem. We're not, we definitely can't do it on our own. And so we have to have like the right suppliers and have one team and have our suppliers also be talking to each other, to make sure that everything goes well. You have to dig deep and find out, really listen, get at that table. I'm really thankful that PVH not only offers me a seat at the table, but they actually like pulling the chair up for me. They want to hear, how global mobility can help their talent mobility and their talent, distribution of the workforce. And it's really important to be a really good, keen listener to make sure, because we all have completely different companies, completely different programs, and what works best at PVH will not work at your company or your company. Like it really is, you're creating, when you're a global mobility manager for a region or wherever, you're really creating a custom-made program for the talent that's within that organization and the culture within that organization. Even the policies can change from one company to the other based on how it's written. Some companies want very legal jargon in their when you do benchmarking stuff, right? You read these policies from other companies, and some of them are very legal jargon, whereas other companies want it to be more friendly and more happy, and it could be a broad spectrum. So what's expected is you're expected pretty much to customize your entire program to the culture of the company where you work.
Yeah, exactly. I think the world, they expect the world is the answer to the question. But I think, so the title is almost a little bit misleading because we're saying best in class global mobility teams, but the answer is that there isn't a one size fits all best in class global mobility team. The best in class is going to be who your company is, what is your industry, who are your assignee populations, what are your main business objectives, and those are we talked about at one point that there's this pendulum all the time, and the business objectives are going to change every 5 years. So you might be best in class today, but let's talk again in 6 months and see if you're still best in class for what the program is supposed to be then. There's always this iterative evolution. So maybe when we use the term agile and iterative, which is very common in the tech world these days, we're all really well informed in that, having worked in mobility for 15 to 25 years. I'm conscious that we have only about 6 more minutes, so I want to go to the floor for some questions if anybody happens to have a question, or in the app. Is there a question here?
Yeah, I spoke earlier about ROI. I've heard it mentioned. Do any of you actually measure it, or got metrics for it? I think it's a bit of a golden unicorn, but just wonder what you guys do within your businesses.
So I picked up on that comment you made earlier, Richard, about ROI being different in every business. And I've touched upon today measures of success. ROI to us is where we can show a tangible value, or we can show something that has changed our model. So tangible value, cost saving from finding local talent instead of sending an expat. Something that changes the our diversity statistics, going through a proper selection process to make sure that it isn't Bob's friend who goes on assignment, it's a diverse candidate who's chosen from a proper panel. Things like that can be measured in a tangible way. And what we've tried to do, is develop this table of measures. Each provide a different thing, but all in all show how you are the hundreds of thousands of pounds you're spending on sending an expat. There is some return from this. Percentages go up, statistics improve. It's a better story. We're saving money, things like that.
Could also create business case forms where prior to the start of assignment, you have, attach some certain KPIs to it and, so that it's measurable. And then to have, do the check every 6 months. Are we still on target? Is this what we wanted to achieve? This is where we're going? Is it failing? Is it going well? Or do we have some headwinds or tailwinds that are changing it? And it may evolve depending on how long you have your assignments for. If they're, 3 years or so, there could be a war breakout all of a sudden while you're on assignment, or something could happen. But to have that constant check-in to make sure that we're still on target with what the goal was. Why are we sending? To be very conscious about why are we sending somebody on assignment? Because it's not cheap. We all know, we spend a lot of money for the business. So we have to be responsible with return on investment.
I think for us it's slightly easier to manage because if we delivered the project on time at the right cost, then the ROI is there tangibly because we got the money, right? So that's how it's easier for us to describe it and define it really.
That the leadership are aware that you've done that.
Yeah.
Contributed.
Yeah. I think there's
Another question?
Thank you. So a further question, what are the biggest challenges you face when you're trying to settle signees in new countries? What are the biggest pain points?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's going to depend on the country.
I was going to say, which country?
Yeah, would you have any?
Yeah. Are there kids involved? Did you want to bring your mother-in-law?
Yep.
It really is a really hard question because it really depends. No, I'm not joking. People love to bring their mother-in-laws places.
Yeah.
But you can't get them immigration compliant in a lot of countries, so that is a big challenge. That'd be one challenge. I think it's a very difficult question because there's so many factors that go into settling what's important for that personal family. And that's actually what keeps it exciting is that every single person is different and every single person's needs are different. And so what you may need going into Hong Kong may be totally different from what, somebody else might need. So, but I think generally right now, I think we'd all agree that in Europe, housing is an issue.
It's an important stage though.
Yes.
The end process. That's not right. The rest of the assignment is actually focused on.
Yeah.
And whether it's a DSP that helps out with orientation, then again, that's a good investment in the DSP. You've got local support within your own organisation. Great, but it's not something that should be able to settle in during this is crucial. Especially if you're going with a partner or family, because they're just as important as you.
I'm going to add one tiny thing, which is that I think if you're going to come up with a theme for what is the most important thing to anticipate or to expect, it's to manage expectations. So that encompasses all the aspects of the policy, but good communication from the beginning is probably the biggest challenge. Did we have one other question on this corner?
It's Sandra. I just wanted to ask from your point of view, do you normally prefer to see a company that provides immigration like Rolls-Royce and a company that provides education like Mecca, or you would like to see one option? What are your thoughts about it? Because I'm trying to look into the future, and this is a question that I often ask myself.
So for us, we're looking at experts. So whether it's individual firms through partnerships or whether it's one, if we can have experts in all of the different countries that we send people to and from, that's what we're looking for personally. It doesn't really matter to us, how it comes to us. We just need that information. But what would make it easier if it is a one-stop shop through collaborations or however. But we want to make sure that we get the best service, the best quality advice. I know we're asking for, we want our cake and eat it too, but we want, a holistic approach, but we don't want to settle for mediocre service in one country and exceptional in the other. We want it to be exceptional, in all of the countries that we operate in.
So if you ask one of my SMEs what would they prefer? They would say one person. You know, when I'm trying to move to a different country, I get 10 different people contacting me. One person wants to talk to me about my shipping, the other one wants to sort out my visa, the other one wants to tell me how much tax I'm going to be paying. That becomes a pain point, and you see that coming back in your assignee surveys. So my dream would be one person to coordinate the whole thing, but trying to find someone who has that range of expertise is the problem. I guess to try and answer your question, I would prefer one organisation to do everything, but I don't think it's possible at the moment.
Yeah, my preference would be the one, but I've not found that one. Still waiting to do it.
Shameless plug for why you should work with networks and of great best-in-class providers. But no, that's all the time that we have. Thank you very much for listening to the session, and thank you to my fabulous panel.